I want to talk to you a little bit today, just a few minutes, about a couple of things that are relevant to this conference to get you thinking about what we will be talking about. First thing that's on my mind is to talk about why scholars should study history and why it's important, pardon me, not history, but violence in history, and why that's important for the humanities today. I think it's a really very important topic. It's important partly because of the history of the 20th century. As you know, the history of the 20th century was incredibly violent, and it has forced historians to confront the issue of violence. And since the post-war period, historians have been developing a large body of scholarship about violence that is more than just state violence and much more sophisticated about state violence. Obviously, we all understand state violence exists in terms of warfare, and that's legitimate violence. And there are other kinds of legitimate state violence that historians, philosophers, sociologists have started to theorize, which is that phrase I used in my title, states of exception, which is that honestly, if a state can use violence to execute people, that is exceptional because we in general don't allow people to kill each other, but the state has an exception to do so for the benefit of the state, to preserve the state. So historians have done a lot of thinking about how can you legitimately use that state of exception. Modern day law courts do it by having court cases and executions. Early modern states did it by tsars ordering through their court cases such executions. So that's a whole field that is burgeoning, that's important to study so that we better understand the use of violence in our own day. And then, of course, the flip side of that is illegitimate state violence, tyranny. And of course, people have been studying that. But what's pretty exciting to me is that historians have been unfolding other aspects of violence in the last several decades. They're much more aware of things like violence endemic in one society, like relationship violence and sexual violence, violence within a relationship, violence in sexual trafficking, violence against the LGBT community based on gender, sexual orientation. And these are now very fruitful areas of study that we hadn't really posed questions about, say, 20, 30 years ago. Also, emotional violence, psychological torture, that kind of thing. We're very much more attuned. And it's important, I think, to be aware, to open your mind to these many kinds of violence, because it makes you look at history differently. It helps you pose a lot of different questions about the past. We're expanding our questions about violence and seeing it in social history, in microhistorical study. We're looking at literature differently. We're looking at the evidence of violence or not in art. For example, we're looking for this theme in political philosophy and social thought. So that studying violence has opened up a lot of thinking in recent decades. And finally, studying violence in the past gets us more aware of it in the present day. We can look in the past for patterns of how violence rose, crime rates rise, crime rates fall. But why do they fall? What do you do socially? Through legislation, through civilizing process, through social values. How did we react to violence in the past? How have different societies dealt with it? That can teach us in the present day what we should do to reduce the violence that we might notice in our own society, whether it's through legislation or media or social values or whatever. So violence is a very fruitful topic, and I'm really excited about this conference.